Oh my gosh, yeah. We're gonna be off this. Yeah.
刚才你攀上了，都给拍过来的，你管是这样。
Song? All right. Good evening. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening for this important commemoration of the June 4 Tiananmen Square massacre. My name is Andrew Bremberg and I'm the president of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. We are honored to host this memorial that was dedicated here just over 15 years ago. And we were honored to open the Victims of Communism Museum 1 year ago, just several blocks over by the White House. Hopefully many of you have had a chance to visit the museum by now. And it was very fitting, I want to say, that last year when we opened the museum, our first temporary exhibit was a specific exhibit on the Tiananmen Square massacre that was done in partnership with the June 4th Memorial Association, and I'm glad that that exhibit, after it left our museum, is now on permanent display in New York, opening just this weekend. So once again, I want to welcome all of you for coming this evening. For the free world, 1989 is remembered as a year of miracles, where the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union began to crumble. But in China, 1989 went in a tragically different direction. The protests in China in 1989 that ultimately culminated in the Tiananmen Square showed the world that the people of China wanted freedom, personal dignity, and liberalization of the Chinese system. Students and citizens across China were demanding that their government allow them freedoms we in the free world take for granted every day. A free press, government accountability, and genuine representation. The Chinese government responded to these peaceful protests by sending out tanks to crush the democracy movement and slaughter countless of its own citizens. That tragic and violent night in June of 1989 showed the world the nature of the Chinese Communist Party and the lengths to which it will go and is willing to preserve its own power. Today, 34 years later, we are still living in the aftermath of that fateful night. And it is for this reason that we still commemorate this appalling tragedy today. This evening, we commemorate the victims who were brutally slaughtered in Tiananmen Square and all those under the rule of the Chinese Communist Party who continue to be subjected to human rights crimes and the brutal denial of their human dignity. Today, the CCP is committing a genocide against Uyghur Muslims and other ethnic minorities in Xinjiang. Since 2017, the CCP has embarked on a campaign of mass internment that has swept up to 2 million members of ethnic groups into re-education camps, the largest incarceration of an ethno-religious minority since the Holocaust. In May of last year, VOC was proud to release the Xinjiang police files, a cache of tens of thousands of documents that has been analyzed by VOC's Senior Fellow and Director of China Studies Program, Dr. Adrian Zenz, which contained the first images the world has seen of the atrocities being committed inside the Xinjiang camps. Of course, in Hong Kong, a city that was once a beacon of freedom and liberty, has been crushed by the Chinese Communist Party. Dozens of pro-democracy leaders, like Jimmy Lai and others, have been arrested, dissenters have been jailed, and elections have been manipulated and postponed. Of course, the CCP's practice of forced organ harvesting also continues without widespread condemnation. This gruesome human rights abuse that occurs around the globe, but most acutely under the CCP, people have been killed for the demand of their organs in a trade that has reached worth over $1 billion a year. And we are proud here in the United States that with near unanimous passage, the U.S. House of Representatives just this March passed the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act led by Representative Chris Smith. The CCP also continues to use the PRC's criminal justice system as a political tool to target Chinese citizens who challenge the regime's authority. Brave individuals and human rights lawyers like Gao Shisheng, Pastor Wang Yi, Pastor John Cao, and most recently, legal scholar Zhu Ziyong and human rights lawyer Ding Jiaxi have been falsely convicted by CCP courts, detained, and sadly in the case of Gao Shisheng, have been disappeared and not heard from since 2017. As of 2019, the Congressional Executive Commission on China Political Prisoners Database contained information on a total of 9,975 cases of political and religious imprisonment in China. We at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation will continue to call for justice and accountability for the victims of the Tiananmen Square massacre, stand with Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, Tibetans, and all Chinese citizens who today continue to suffer brutal crimes under the rule of the Chinese Communist Party. Thank you for joining us this evening as we commemorate those who have suffered and died at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, as we stand together for those fighting for freedom around the world today. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce Congressman Frank Wolf, who is the former Republican representative to the 10th District of Virginia, a position he held from 1981 to 2015. He served, while serving in the House, Congressman Wolf co-chaired the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission and was a vocal champion of human rights around the globe. Throughout his time in the House, Congressman Wolf vocally criticized China's human rights record and authored the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, which promotes religious liberty as an important priority of U.S. foreign policy. Congressman Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Keep your eyes on these socks. I want to thank the Victims of Communism, and you put out the best newsletter of anybody in town, and I think everybody who doesn't get it ought to get it, and every member of Congress and everybody in the executive branch ought to also get it too. We all remember the horrific images on TV of the heroic Tiananmen Square democracy protest. The army tanks smashing into the square, killing unarmed student protesters, crushing vehicles, and leaving bloody bodies in the street. The enduring image of that tank man, a protester who bravely stood in front of the approaching army tanks. In 1991, Congressman Chris Smith and I visited China. We asked to visit Beijing Prison No. 1 and meet with a prisoner. In the prison factory, we saw prisoners making socks for export, including those made with a golf logo. The prison warden told us that there were 40 inmates. He said there were 40 inmates in the prison who had taken part in the June 1989 Tiananmen protest, and not even our own embassy knew. And Congressman Smith and I have pictures of Tiananmen Square demonstrators in prison making socks with golfers on the side for export to the United States. Since then, the oppression of the Chinese Communist government has dramatically increased. The Chinese government is an equal opportunity persecutor of people of faith. Christians, Tibetan Buddhists, Uyghur Muslims, and the Falun Gong. In Xinjiang, the CCP is committing genocide, actual genocide, operating a network of mass internment camps and prisons and systematically separating Uyghur children from their parents. They're also harvesting organs for sale from Falun Gong and others. In many of the cases, the people are still alive when the operation is taking place to take their organs out. Any notion of Hong Kong's autonomy is a fantasy. The once vibrant and open society that all of us have visited has been transformed with shocking speed. The ruthless crackdown on dissent found 90-year-old Cardinal Zhang in his crosshairs, and Jimmy Lai, who's now been in prison for almost 2 years, and I almost hear very few people in the United States speaking out for Cardinal Zhang or speaking out for Jimmy Lai. In every corner of the globe, every corner, the Chinese government actively works to subvert U.S. interests. FBI Director Christopher Wray said, quote, that counterintelligence and economic espionage efforts emanating from the government of China and the Chinese Communist Party are a grave threat to the economic well-being and democratic values of the United States. The Chinese government oversees the most advanced surveillance state in human history and actively exports these technologies to other repressive regimes worldwide. They're aiding and abetting the Russians in the war against Ukraine, and you've been following to see the terrible things that they're doing. And they're working with Iran as a direct threat to Israel and others in the Middle East. And there's a direct threat with regard to Thailand, a military threat with regard to Thailand. I was first elected to Congress in 1980 on the coattails of a guy named Ronald Reagan, who was one of the greatest presidents we've ever had. From the Eisenhower, Kennedy, Carter, and Reagan administration, it would have been, and I'm going to go very slowly, it would have been unthinkable for any reputable firm to take on the Soviet Union as a client. Yet today, untold profits are being raked in by lobbyists and law firms representing the Chinese Communist government and Chinese-controlled companies, whitewashing the abuses and aims of the CCP. It's time to make this activity illegal. And as I close, I say, we see persecution of the Catholic Church. We see persecution of the Protestant Church. We see cultural genocide against Tibet. In every Tibetan monastery, I've been to Tibet in 1993, in every Tibetan monastery there's a CCP police in every monastery monitoring what they do. Imagine if in your church or your synagogue there was a police there monitoring. Actual genocide against the Uyghurs, organ harvesting of Falun Gong, the end of freedom in Hong Kong, a direct military threat to Taiwan, and a national security threat to America. The Biden administration and this Congress should ban once and for all lobbying groups and law firms from representing the Chinese government and its interests that is doing so many bad things. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Congressman Wolf. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Zhang Yang. Dr. Yang is a scholar and democracy activist internationally recognized for his efforts to promote democracy in China. He has been involved in the Chinese democracy movement since the 1980s. He participated in the 1989 Tiananmen protests, and in 2002, Zhang Li returned to China to support the labor movement and was imprisoned for 5 years. Following his release and his subsequent return to the U.S., Zhang Li founded Citizen Power Initiatives for China, an organization that promotes China's peaceful transition to democracy. Zhang Li.
Thank you, Ambassador. Dear friends, as we gather tonight, the flickering candlelights casting a gentle glow on our faces. we mourn the fallen brave young men and women of Tiananmen Square. 34 years ago, on that horrific, never to be forgotten day, as tank rolled, thousands of young lives were cut short. Their dreams were extinguished. Their voices were silenced. There is a Chinese saying, there is no greater sorrow than the gray-haired burying the dark-haired. Today's remaining Tiananmen democracy movement participants have begun to turn gray. As we mourn the young men and women who sacrificed their lives 34 years ago, it feels as if their gray hair beating firework to the dark hair, to the young man. So the sorrow is truly immeasurable. The pain is never gone. The fallen at Tiananmen Squares were the embodiment of hope, a generation that dared to dream of a better China, a China where human rights, freedom, democracy flourish. They believed in the power of their voices, in their ability to effect change, and in the future that would embrace the ideals that they held dear. Aspirations of now a new generation seeking reform and change are displayed in the white paper movement. Just as the students in Tiananmen Square did decades ago, today's young activists are demanding transparency, accountability, and political freedoms. The white paper movement echoes the spirit of Tiananmen. It serves as a powerful reminder that the fight for freedom and democracy is ongoing in China, and the ideals of Tiananmen still resonate deeply within the heart of Chinese people. We must stand in solidarity with these courageous individuals and support their hope and aspiration. Their struggles are not isolated struggles, are not isolated incidents. They represent a global fight for human rights and human dignity. By joining together to amplify their voices, we can create a world where the ideals of Tiananmen are realized. May the candles that we hold tonight serve as a reminder that the flame of hope must never be extinguished. Let it burn brightly in our hearts as we remember the fallen, courageous young men and women of Tiananmen and carry their legacy forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Zhang Li. Now I'd like to introduce Elfadar Iltabir, who is the president of the Uyghur American Association. She was born in East Turkestan, and her family has faced repression at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. When her father, a prominent Uyghur writer and intellectual, felt threatened for his life in Xinjiang, her family fled China in 1992, and Elfadar immigrated to the United States in 2000. She has over 20 years of marketing and project management experience and has taught the Uyghur language to U.S. government employees. She is an active member of the Uyghur community and outspoken human rights activist. Elfadar.
Hello everyone. Assalamu alaikum. It's such an emotional day. Well, for Uyghurs, every day is an emotional day. We are going through a lot. But today I feel the shared goal, shared, common warmness from the candles and from you guys. As we mark the 34th anniversary of 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre, it is very hard not to make a connection to the ongoing genocide against Uyghurs. The international community failed back then, and it is still failing today to hold the Chinese Communist regime accountable for the crime that it has carried against its people, against Uyghur, and also to the world at large. In 1989, hundreds of thousands of students held peaceful demonstrations in Tiananmen Square and many other cities across the nation with the banners of justice, free speech, anti-corruption, and political reform. As the world witnessed, a massacre was carried out by the CCP regime. Thousands of lives lost on June 4, 1989, as the result of CCP's brutal suppressions went in vain. More than 30 years later, there is still no justice, no free speech, and no reform in China. CCP got away with its crime. The failure by the international community in the last 3 decades to hold the regime accountable has emboldened CCP. In East Turkestan, more than 3 million Uyghurs were locked up in the concentration camps since 2016. Hundreds of thousands of innocent Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities died. Children were separated from their parents. Uyghurs are subjected to forced labor, forced sterilization, forced marriage, and the list keeps going on. Both ethnically and culturally, Uyghurs are facing annihilation. In Hong Kong, the CCP broke its promise of 50-year peace and democratic transition. Detained demonstrators enacted new law prohibiting any activities against CCP, turning Hong Kong into a police state. Now CCP is turning its attention to Taiwan. Even the right to mourn over June 4th, as we are doing this evening, is being denied, restricted, and crushed. As it has always been in China, it is now the same in Hong Kong. Even abroad, the Chinese regime seeks to warp this narrative. The same evil that resulted in the massacre is being downplayed and whitewashed by overlooking the genocide of the Uyghurs. With the brave examples of the protesters, their family members who refuse to forget, and all who take them as an example, we must continue our struggle. Just as the memory of Tiananmen and the bravery of ordinary people has withstood the test of the decades, we must look to the future. The world is no longer ignorant, but they are still willfully negligent. A few strong steps have not yet proven that our leaders have the resolve to stop this evil. This is not a regime which can cooperate in good faith while backing Russia's brutal war in Ukraine. We cannot legitimize a state party which is carrying out the largest mass detention of an ethno-religious group since the Holocaust. A regime which is kidnapping close to 1 million Uyghur children from their homes and families to be brainwashed into idolizing the same state that murdered the children of Tiananmen. No empty promises of Chinese government should be met with expectations or praised by our government. We need accountability now until a reckoning for the history of Tiananmen comes, until the truth is available regarding what happened in 1989, and until accountability for the Uyghur genocide is met. We will continue to remind the world of the true character of the Chinese Communist Party. We will never forget, and we will never be silenced. May these memories spur on onward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alfadar. A very important point about accountability and demanding that our government hold the Chinese government accountable for these crimes that it has failed to do these last 30 years. Now I'd like to introduce Bu Chung Sering, who was born in Tibet, His family fled to India in 1960 in wake of the Chinese communist invasion. He studied in India and received a BA in English literature from the University of Delhi in 1982. Thereafter, he worked as a journalist with Indian Express in New Delhi before joining the Central Tibetan Administration in Dar es Salaam, India, in January of 1984. He worked as the editor of Tibetan Bulletin, the official CTA journal, and served as the office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Dar es Salaam, as well as the office of Tibet in Switzerland. He joined the International Campaign for Tibet in Washington, D.C. in 1995, and currently leads the Research and Monitoring Unit. Buchan Sering.
Thank you, Ambassador. On behalf of the International Campaign for Tibet and as a Tibetan, I'm here to express our solidarity with our Chinese brothers and sisters on this anniversary of the Tiananmen Massacre. The principles for which the young men and women then in Beijing stood for, namely human rights, democracy, are on the one hand something that was close to them. But at the same time, these are values that are also shared by the American people. And it is an American value too. And therefore, we here in the United States feel strongly about what happened in Beijing in 1989. Secondly, 1989 and 34 years is also very close to the Tibetan people. 1989 was the year when the Panchen Lama was born. 34 years is the years of the Panchen Lama, and he has been missing since 1995. He symbolizes the Tibetan people. And just as even though the Chinese authorities disappeared the Panchen Lama, the Tibetan people have lost hope. Similarly, even though the brutal regime in Beijing clamped down on the student demonstrations in Beijing then in 1989, today the cause continues, and you're gathering here and our gathering here and throughout the world is a testimony to the fact that the Chinese Communist Party has failed. Thirdly, we here in the United States for some years or for some time thought that the best way to deal with the communist Chinese regime in Chinese is try to engage them and sort of appease them, and that they might change for the better. Now America has realized, and there's now a new bipartisan consensus, that China has to be confronted. That China is not a responsible player in the International Committee of Nations. So this is a challenge. You're gathering here tonight is a challenge to the Chinese Communist Party. To which direction do they want the future of China to be? Do they want China to be a responsible member of the international community? Do they want China to be respected? We don't have any beef against the Chinese people. It's the Communist Party and the regime, ruthless regime, that is the problem. And they have to decide that if they want to be seen as responsible member of the international community, they have to abide by international values, and they have to listen to the call of the nation, call of their own citizens, call of the international community, that as long as human rights and democracy are not respected in China, the international community will not keep quiet. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's good to see there are many young people here, and I realize there are many folks here that were not alive in 1989. Our next speaker, Joey Su, is a human rights advocate now based here in Washington, D.C. She played a vital role during Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests in 2019 as a student leader organizing on-campus and citywide protests. She also co-founded a student coalition that led cohesive international advocacy efforts for Hong Kong. After fleeing Hong Kong in late 2020, she continued to serve as an advisor to the Interparliamentary Alliance on China and policy advisor to Hong Kong Watch. Joey.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation for once again hosting this very important event here in Washington, D.C. My name is Joey. I grew up in Hong Kong, and I grew up in a very, very strict household. And growing up, I was never allowed to watch any kinds of TV programs or nonfiction or fictions like novels or comic books. That was not allowed in my home. And the only thing that I would be allowed to watch was this news broadcast every day in Hong Kong at 6:30 p.m. hosted by TVB, Hong Kong's largest television broadcasting company, which unfortunately now has become completely the Chinese Communist Party's mouthpiece. That was a time in Hong Kong where even pro-Beijing media was to talk about June 4th, was to talk about the Tiananmen Massacre. That was a time in Hong Kong where the once existing Apple Daily and other independent media outlets still existed. And it was from that news channel that I first saw and heard and learned about the Tiananmen Massacre, the brutal crackdown by the Chinese Communist Party against peaceful student protesters at the Tiananmen Square at dawn on June 4th, 1989. And as I grew older, I started attending the Tiananmen Massacre Candlelight Vigil at Hong Kong's Victoria Park with my Chinese teacher, with my liberal studies teacher, and then with my friends and then my classmates. Despite everything, despite the heat in Hong Kong, despite the rain, and despite everything, the vigil never stopped. It went on for over 30 years straight. Every year you see parents bringing their kids, you see students learning from their teachers about the Tiananmen Massacre, about June 4th. And you see all these people, all these individuals coming from all across the world to Hong Kong, including those individuals who longed for freedom, coming from mainland China to Hong Kong to learn about the Tiananmen Massacre, to commemorate the victims, the individuals who sacrificed in 1989. For such a long time, Hong Kong was that beacon of hope, of freedom. It was the only place that was under the CCP's control that was able to talk about June 4th. And I still remember very distinctly last year, I stood at the very same spot talking about the Tiananmen Massacre. Right before I speak, a dozen of Hong Kongers got arrested for holding a candlelight, standing by themselves in the streets commemorating June 4th. Obviously, the candlelight vigils are no longer allowed in Hong Kong, and it was not just that. You see the organizers of these June 4th candlelight vigils being arrested, imprisoned, simply for demanding justice and truth about the crackdown. You see that books and artwork and movies, documentaries about June 4th, about Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement back in 2019, being completely banned from Hong Kong. And a few weeks ago, I met Jens, the artist who created the Pillar of Shame in Hong Kong. And he told me that the pillars was created to remind us of shameful events, including like the June 4th Tiananmen Massacre, that should never happen. The statue itself stood in the campus at the University of Hong Kong for over 20 years, and just last year, it was removed and confiscated by the Hong Kong police force, and overnight it became an evidence. It became a statue that would threaten national security. And unfortunately, that is the Hong Kong we know today. All the high levels of autonomy, human rights, rule of law, independent judicial system, all of these rights and freedoms that was promised to us by the Chinese Communist Party, written in the Sino-British Joint Declaration, are all being taken away from Hong Kongers. We often say that the Chinese Communist Party can ban the Tiananmen Massacre, the vigil, in Causeway Bay, in Victoria's Park in Hong Kong. We always say that they can ban us from commemorating this in Hong Kong, but they cannot ban these candlelights from turning into lights that will ignite changes all around the world. And it is very true. From the new Pillar of Shame in Berlin to the countless Hong Kongers who are now organizing commemorations all across the world, from Australia to Japan, from the United States to Canada, and then to UK. We are still fighting. We are still lighting up that candle. We're still resisting and defending the freedom and human rights that Hong Kongers deserve and were promised. Our communities are fighting hard. But besides statements and words of support, what is the international community doing for us? The situation in Hong Kong is worsening. My friends, our friends and loved ones are now still sitting behind bars in prisons, waiting for what is likely a lifetime imprisonment simply for participating in peaceful demonstrations and for running in democratic primary elections. And in East Turkestan, we see that Uyghurs and Turkic Muslims are still experiencing an ongoing genocide, are still enduring sexual harassment and abuse and physical attacks, forced sterilization, all these crimes against humanity inside of concentration camps. And in Tibet, we are still seeing this media blackout, blocking out all this information from going out from Tibet or going inside of Tibet. We see that every year so many monks and Tibetans are self-immolating out of desperation. And for the Chinese dissident communities, even in exile, they're not free. They're still facing this escalating transnational repression from the Chinese Communist Party, from their state-affiliated actors. They fear infiltration, they fear physical harassment and attacks, and are being constantly monitored by secret police stations and all these other state-affiliated actors. And the international community is not doing enough. All these crimes that the Chinese Communist Party is committing today are globally recognized. Even the United Nations have recognized the ongoing Uyghur genocide as a crime against humanity. But what we are doing, what are we actually doing to help our communities? Every year on June 4th, we commemorate and we remember the victims who sacrificed back then in 1989. But I hope that starting from this year, we also make this a day of reflection, of action, where we reflect what we have been doing, and the international community to reflect what else can we do for our communities who are still fighting so hard under so much pressure and attack. With that, I hope that every one of you here, and those who are commemorating June 4th also in other corners of the world, would turn our commemoration and would turn this candlelight into concrete actions to really support our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Joey. So I think all the candles have been distributed. If you haven't gotten it lit, please do so. We will now observe our moment of silence as we remember those who lost, the thousands who were killed and lost their lives in Tiananmen Square 34 years ago, and the so many more millions who have suffered under the Chinese Communist Party since then and continue to do so. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. I encourage all of you to continue to do all of your efforts to put pressure on our own government and companies around the world to draw greater attention. We at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation will continue to commemorate this horrific day and anniversary in the hopes that one day we will do so in a free Hong Kong, in a free China. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Have a good night.
Uyghurs.
Down with the CCP.
Down with the CCP.
Free Hong Kong!
Free Hong Kong.
Free China!
Free China.
Free the Uyghur!
Free the Uyghurs.
Free the Hong Konger!
Free the Hong Kongers. Free Tibet.
Free Tibet!
Free Macau!
There we go.
Works for the great state of Florida, you know, so I'm seeing around San Francisco. Ship that to you. So yeah, we should actually. Can't blame that for being ambitious. It's like, yeah, here we go. Ah, well, let's not. I don't think it's that. No, I mean, it's a mushy. Right.
A Russian man claiming to hold top-level secrets about Russian advanced bombers has just turned up at the U.S. southern border, seeking asylum. The man claims to have been an engineer at a production facility over in the city of Kazan, and he says that he possesses top-secret information about the White Swan Tu-160, which is the most advanced bomber in the Russian arsenal. U.S. border officials, they interviewed the man, and they determined that his story was in fact credible and eventually passed him off to the FBI, who are still in the process of interrogating him right now. However, analysts have pointed out that the fact that the story was even leaked to the public is an indication that perhaps the American government is encouraging other Russians who also hold top-level secrets to also escape to America. And if you thought that was interesting, well then you should click on that button below this video and check out Epoch TV, one of the best no-censorship video platforms on the internet. On there you will find awesome programs like American thought leaders.
We've now been, for 2 years, trying to obtain the unredacted emails. We're down to the last 50 pages. So that's where all the incriminating evidence is.
Crossroads.
One of the big things happening right now is what's taking place with Russia and China.
Counterpunch.
You will see information you've never seen anywhere else.
Facts Matter. I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free. As well as a plethora of great documentaries, wholesome movies that you can enjoy with your whole family.
If I reach 1 hour, I accomplish something.
Cooking programs, and my absolute favorite, programs about traditional art and traditional music, which can honestly uplift your mood and fill you with hope for the future. And the best thing about Epoch TV, at least in my opinion, is that there's no corporate backing and there's no allegiance to some anti-American agenda.
How dare you come to this peaceful community and try to scam these people? What the hell are you talking about?
But rather, it's just good, honest, wholesome content that's based in truth and tradition.
I saw him. It was incredible.
Something that you can actually sit down with your whole family and enjoy, knowing that some ideology is not about to be pushed upon you.
And who's fighting it? We're fighting it here at Epoch Times, and we need to keep bringing you the news.
And so again, if you'd like to check out Epoch TV, just click on that button below this video. You and your family will absolutely love it.